the Prime Minister of India welcoming the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom for the G20 Summit. Rishi Sunak yesterday telling everybody that it is a great year for, in fact, India, the G20,
Mr.
the Cricket
Sergey
World
Lavrov,
Cup. So much
Minister
is
of
happening
Foreign
for
Affairs
India.
of the Russian Federation.
There you have it, Sergey Lavrov, the Foreign Minister of Russia, representing Vladimir Putin and Russia at the G20 Summit. He has been doing this for the better share of his tenure, be it the Raisina Hill dialogue that is held in the national capital, to all the summits that you've seen this year, from the BRICS summit where Lavrov was again in attendance because Vladimir Putin could not in fact make it. And it is again important to note here that Russia-Ukraine war is going to be a hot topic on the high table whenever discussions are being carried out. In that essence, Sergey Lavrov's presence is of utmost importance, ladies and gentlemen. We're getting visuals of the Prime Minister welcoming all the leaders of these member nations. Long red carpet at the Bharat Mandapam to take part in the G20 summit being held in India. Now we're going to be speaking to a lot of top experts. We're going to be speaking to former Indian diplomats, and we've got our own voice from the ground, from Bharat Mandapam, that we're going to constantly go through to. Let me bring in Ambassador Manju Seth, former Indian diplomat, and Professor Rajan Kumar, international policy expert, both on the broadcast with us over here. I'm going to first quickly go across to Manju Seth, former Indian diplomat. Ma'am, how are you looking at the developments today? What a big day for India. It rained in the morning, but that hasn't dampened our excitement. The Prime Minister was there at his given punctual time, which goes on to say how big and important this is for India.
Of course, it is very important, and the visuals that you showed it was a very warm welcome and a great warmth between the leaders and our Prime Minister. And I think this is a very positive thing. And the G20 summit, of course, is very crucial to address economic issues, economic problems, and the many other areas included in the G20 deliberations. And I feel that the fact that all these top leaders have made it a point to be here, and they will deliberate. While, as mentioned by many of the others earlier, the documents are all almost done. There's almost agreement at the bureaucratic level. Now, whatever the sticking points, for that the leaders' presence is very important, and they will find solutions, find via medias, and come out. I think most probably, unless there are some last-minute spoilers, come out with a declaration that will reflect the commitment, the vision for solving global problems and global issues.
No, you're absolutely right, because Global South is not just third worldism anymore, ma'am. We're looking at Global South as a responsibility, and the Delhi Declaration is going to be the first and the right step in that direction. Before we move on, before I bring in Professor Ranjan Kumar, let me just show you a ground report. Our colleague and Strategic Affairs editor, Aditya Rajkal, he's at the Bharat Mandapam. Take a look at this ground report that he's brought in, and we will come and, expand the discussion further.
Right behind me at the Bharat Mandapam, you can see right here the main venue of the G20 summit, where the 20 leaders would be arriving, and of course 9 special invitees. Bharat Mandapam was inaugurated by the Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi, on July 26, and has been an inspiration from the Anubhav Mandapam of Lord Vishweshwara. And of course we will see 2 important sessions today, one Earth and one Family, taking place between the G20 leaders. Apart from that, 3 crucial bilaterals also taking place today with the Prime Minister of UK and of course Prime Ministers of Italy and Japan as well through the day. There were 3 bilaterals that had taken place yesterday as well with US, Mauritius and Bangladesh. We also know through our sources in the Ministry of External Affairs that at about 5 p.m. there will be 2 crucial multilaterals that will also take place on the sidelines of the G20. One of those is being spoken about on connectivity between Saudi Arabia, UAE, India, of course talking about how connectivity of railways takes place in the Middle East, and then through shipment routes, the same connectivity then travels to India between USA, Saudi Arabia, UAE and India. Of course, a big talking point has been the Ukraine-Russia crisis as well, and that is something US, Germany and several other countries are likely to raise during the G20 as well. It's important to also mention that Russia and China have already decided to not send their heads of states for this G20, but will be represented by senior ministers from respective governments. Already there's been a lineup of G20 leaders in New Delhi who will be holding these bilaterals through the day today and tomorrow. And tomorrow is the day after the last session that finally we'll see a New Delhi declaration, a communique, but we'll have to wait and watch how that really transpires. Last time around in Bali, Prime Minister Modi had spoken about how this is not an era of war. Will that be something that would be reflected in this statement as well, is something that needs to be seen. We'll be bringing you all the live updates from Bharat Mandapam.
Well, for more updates right from Bharat Mandapam, live from Bharat Mandapam, we're going to continuously, go back and forth to Aditya, who's with us at the Bharat Mandapam. But before we do that, Rajan Kumar, international policy expert, with us also on the broadcast. We've just, heard Joko Widodo's name being, announced, the Indonesian, leader, and at the ASEAN. Which was on the heels of the G20 summit. The Prime Minister visited, Indonesia. He was in Jakarta for the ASEAN India Summit and the East Asia Summit. And again, Professor Rajan, over there, the Global South and the responsibility of the Global South, and talking about how, China's absurdist claims can't fly anymore, talking about how territorial integrity is of the highest and grave significance to all the nations of, the ASEAN conglomerate. That does go on to say that India is also going to lead the South Pacific end as well.
Thank you, Kabir. This is very interesting. This event is, I'm just impressed by the grandeur of the event, where you see a galaxy of world leaders, top 20 world leaders, like parading as you see in the fashion event. And just the scale of this event is amazing. But coming to your question of Indo-Pacific and Prime Minister's visit to Southeast Asia for ASEAN India Summit and East Asia Meet, so that's very interesting for 2-3 reasons. First, he reiterated the same thing that he said earlier, that this is not the era of war, this is the era of diplomacy and dialogue. So he reiterated there also, and that's very important. Second, that Southeast Asian countries, as you know, that all these countries, we focus on centrality of Southeast Asia in the Indo-Pacific, and we have made official statements number of times. So from that perspective, his visit is important. It was a very tight scheduled visit where he had to host the leaders, and then he had to visit there also. And then the third important point is China's countering China through ASEAN, in the sense that there are a few countries in ASEAN which are not happy with the Chinese policy of what it defines as a 10-dash line or 9-dash line sometimes,
right.
And territorial claims. So Prime Minister also mentioned about the territorial issue, territorial sovereignty of smaller states, and countries like Vietnam, Malaysia, Philippines, etc. They're offended by Chinese territorial claims. So it gives kind of support to these small nations in Southeast Asia, and we have excellent trade with Southeast Asian countries. We have already some kind of trade deal, but we are trying to enhance it to proper free trade kind of deal with Southeast Asia, taking it to a new level. We already have some agreement, but we are trying to take it to a new level. So these were the important issues, and that shows that how Southeast Asian countries are important, how Indonesia in particular is important, because Indonesia is also a part of this troika which manages the entire event of G20. So from that perspective, it is important. And as you mentioned that the president is visiting today, Indonesian president is here.
No, you're absolutely right. And all these, Southeast Asian nations are looking at India as that guiding, beacon, that, light of guidance. We're going to continue to, touch on those facets as well. Ambassador Seth and Professor, do stay on with us, because let's quickly go across to Aditya, a report that is filed in from inside the Bharat Mandapam this time around. For your perusal and for the perusal of all the viewers, take a look what the setup is like, what are the facilities, and what is, on display for all the global leaders.
Begins in New Delhi. Most of the world leaders have arrived in New Delhi. Prime Minister Narendra Modi held 3 bilaterals on Friday evening with the Prime Minister of Bangladesh with the leader from Mauritius, and of course the big bilateral between India and the United States, between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and US President Biden. A longest statement of 29 points was released by the White House immediately after the bilateral ended, which stated a lot of progress in the strategic partnership between India and the United States. But the big talking point has been the G20 and building some kind of a consensus. The big question certainly is that will there be a final declaration, a New Delhi declaration, a communique that will be launched here, and will there be a consensus on the same? Already we know that two countries, Russia and China, will not be attending in the form of the head of the states, but have sent representatives from respective countries, perhaps because of the building conflict between Russia and Ukraine. On the other side, United States, Canada and Germany will be perhaps raising the issue of Ukraine at the summit itself. But Prime Minister Narendra Modi at Bali last year had maintained that this is not an era of war. And India, therefore, would want a peaceful solution to this conflict and some kind of a consensus emerging. We will be bringing you all the updates from here at the G20 venue at Bharat Mandapam.
Right then, that was a report from inside the Bharat Mandapam. What can be expected today? Also joining us on the broadcast is Professor Asif Ramiz Daudi, foreign affairs expert. Professor Asif, I'm going to quickly come to you for your opening comments on what happened yesterday in that bilateral between Prime Minister Modi and Joe Biden. Of course, from MQ-9 Reaper drones to jet engine technology to the WTO poultry dispute being resolved to finally a proper 29-pointer press statement. According to you, what is the most important and significant point in that 29-pointer joint press statement? Because, of course, one is that it gave time to both the leaders to come again and, essentially assess the execution and implementation of whatever was discussed in Washington. But now it seems like we'll have to wait and find out as to what happens. All right, I'm being told Aditya is in fact with us from Bharat Mandapam live. Let's quickly go across to Aditya for another update. Aditya, what has changed from the last time we spoke to you? The Prime Minister is welcoming all these delegates, shaking hands in front of that iconic konark wheel. All the global leaders, it seems, have made their way. What can be expected? How soon is the Prime Minister going to address the nations?
Well, that's right, Kabir. The official ceremony, the opening ceremony is beginning in a few minutes from now. We've already seen all the G20 leaders and the 9 invitees actually coming in to the venue, the Bharat Mandapam. And also, we've seen in a few minutes to the main venue, the central hall where the event will take place. We know that there are 2 sessions that are slated for today, One Earth as well as One Family, in which various global issues would be discussed for a consensus. Whether consensus would be arrived or not is something that needs to be deliberated. Tomorrow would be the final session of the G20. But before that, on the sidelines, there will be several bilaterals and multilaterals also that will take place. Between 1 p.m. and 2:30 p.m. today, there are 2 bilaterals that are going to be held between Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and his counterparts from UK and Japan. In the evening, we'll have another bilateral between Prime Minister Modi and his counterpart from Italy. There are 2 multilaterals that are going to be held at around 5 p.m. this evening. And finally, the Rashtrapati, the President of India, would be hosting all the G20 leaders and invitees for dinner. Now, most crucially, now the leaders have reached Bharat Mandapam. Delhi, as you know, there's no traffic out there. People are inside their residences. But there is a lot of color, a lot of vibrancy in the air. For a year, people have waited for G20 to be held in New Delhi to host these global leaders, and hundreds of small events, side events and working group meetings took place all across the country. And now the wait is for the communique, for of course the G20 declarations, the New Delhi declaration that is likely to come out tomorrow. But there is one sticking point, Kabir, that we have been discussing here on News9 Live, and that is about Russia's invasion and aggression towards Ukraine. And that is something that US, Germany and several other countries are likely to rake up. Of course, China and Russia have skipped in the form of their heads of delegations, the heads of states not visiting the New Delhi G20 Summit. Xi Jinping and Putin will not be here. But of course, we have representatives nations, from both these countries. Their foreign ministers will be here. But will there be a consensus on the declaration is the biggest point here, because Prime Minister Modi has always spoken about peaceful means to resolution of the conflict that has been taking place for more than a year now. So
no, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right, Aditya. We earlier saw Olaf Scholz also, who's already said that those long-range missiles are not going to be given to Ukraine, even as a new batch of Leopard tanks have been, pushed through for Ukraine. But coming back to the theme of, the G20 summit, the first session, it seems, is going to be One Earth. Now, what's going to transpire in this One Earth? I think the focus is going to be towards climate change, that climate change mandate that Prime Minister Modi has been talking about for the better part of half a decade now.
Absolutely. Since the Paris COP22, we have seen, deliberations on the climate change. Several of the developed countries have been going back on their commitments, really. So climate change is one of the most significant aspects of the G20 that will be discussed in the One Earth segment. Will there be consensus on that? Will there be commitments and resolutions really be adopted? Because there's been a raging debate between the developing countries and the developed countries on several aspects and commitments on G20 as well. So we'll have to wait and watch what transpires on that front. But as you rightly pointed out, One Earth and One Family are the two important sessions of G20 that will be taking place today. Tomorrow, there could be some leaders that could be also holding press conferences and deliberating on what happened at G20 and what are their expectations from India's presidency and otherwise in the bilateral relations and strategic partnership that they have with New Delhi.
Away from all the diplomacy, and we're going to let you off the hook real soon, Aditya, because I'm sure you've got much more important stuff to finish right now. But what's the vibe like right now inside the Bharat Mandapam? What can you see? What are the facilities out there for all the journalists? Give us a sense of what it's like to be at the Bharat Mandapam to all the viewers who are watching the show.
Well, I am right now at the International Media Center within the Bharat Mandapam premises. This is the erstwhile Pragati Maidan in New Delhi, and this is being developed as a business district of the National Capital of India. Right behind me, you can see these flags of all the G20 nations and, of course, the invitees as well as United Nations and European Union. But apart from that, at the International Media Center, there are hundreds of media delegations, not just national journalists from India, but all across these G20 nations and the invitee nations that have come in. There are other delegates also who are curiously come here as speakers who are also participating here. Not very far from here, there is an exhibition and crafts mela that is also taking place. There are 30 products on display from various states and union territories of the country. So clearly the cultural aspect, the tradition aspect of the country really on display here. One thing significant is, of course, the konark that was on the backdrop when Prime Minister actually received all the G20 leaders this morning. And a few minutes from now, we will be listening to Prime Minister, who will be making his opening remarks at the opening session of the G20.
Right.
And of course, then the session formally begins.
Well, absolutely. We're also getting visuals of that, exactly the konark, the replica of the konark wheel that you were talking about, Aditya. And President Biden now making his way right in front of the konark wheel to shake hands with the Prime Minister. It seems like the United States' president has also made his way. Aditya, many thanks for joining with us. We're going to continue to come back to you as in when you have updates for News9 Live. Ladies and gentlemen, Aditya Rajkol, he's already stationed there. He's getting us live updates from the Bharat Mandapam, our strategic affairs editor. Meanwhile, even as the guests continue to trickle in, that's President of the United States, that major and crucial bilateral that took place last evening. We all saw those visuals. People are saying it's already looking like a trailer of a movie where these two world leaders are going to be cast as protagonists. And aren't they the protagonists of the current global diplomatic scenario, the geopolitical scenario? Prime Minister Modi and President Joe Biden. Prime Minister, of course, talking about the konark wheel now with Joe Biden. And for the perusal of all the viewers, let's tell them about the konark wheel ourselves, because this konark wheel is so iconic. We have in fact taken the same in our tricolor as well. Konark wheel, which was built during the 13th century under the reign of King Narasimha Deva I, Now, the wheel with the 24 spokes is something that has been adapted into the India's national flag and embodies India's ancient wisdom, advanced civilization, and architectural excellence. The rotating motion of the konark wheel symbolizes time, the Kala Chakra, as well as progress and continuous change. It serves as a powerful symbol of the wheel of democracy that reflects the resilience of democratic ideals and commitment to progress in society. And today, ladies and gentlemen, that progress is not only domestic, it is also, of course, international. Professor Asif Ramiz Daudi, foreign affairs expert, continues to be with us on the broadcast here. Professor Asif, Aditya was talking about how, Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin haven't made their way for the G20 summit. However, representation in the shape of Sergei Lavrov and Li Qiang. But how do you think these two countries are now going to posture itself? Because like Aditya was talking about, there needs to be a consensus on what needs to be done about the Ukraine-Russia war. Many are also saying Delhi could be that venue which might revive the Black Sea grain initiative as well.
Consensus issue is a bigger issue because we have representatives from China and Russia, and though things are not binding, but once we have the representatives, we have also seen in the meetings in the recent past that how things get complicated in many cases. When it comes to Russia and Ukraine war, I don't think we are going to have a kind of unanimous, support or something. The consensus will be an issue. There could be some sort of division because we know that's a big concern of Russia and of course China and the Western European nations and America. When it comes to other issues like, for example, food security and technology and other, let's say, like the issues of the larger interest that can be really greater, the best things for for different countries and members of G20 as well. So those issues may have some sort of, positive consensus, but since we have the representatives, I think that is one of the bigger concerns I have been also analyzing for the past few days on different channels. So let's see what happens, but still we should be hopeful about what is going to happen, because this is magnificent, the way India has emerged, and it's shining like a star, because we have all these stars from across the globe right now in India, and the entire world is tracking this, having an eye on this, and
you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right, Professor. The entire world has its eyes on India right now. The stars analogy that you put out is actually right. I've been saying it for a while now. Delhi has been decked up like the proverbial bride. That's how beautiful the national capital looks right now. Ambassador Said, coming back to you, we just got visuals of Mohammed bin Salman, and importantly, it's also very important to note that the Prime Minister's a multilateral, beg your pardon, is going to take place on the side events later in the evening at about 5 p.m. according to sources right now. It's going to be one big multilateral on the connectivity and a rail connectivity between the UAE, Saudi Arabia and United States. Of course, India right at the helm. How far and long do you think this project is going to go?
I think this is a very important project, because connectivity and free, the threat to the free lines of communication, sea lines of communication is very real. And this connectivity of to the rails and to the ports between India and the Middle East and the US, I think will be a very important connection once it comes. And I think it's very doable. And already, if you remember, when the PM went to Greece, there also was talk connecting the port to Europe, India and the port to the Middle East. So I think all these projects, connectivity projects, are key to ensuring free movement, smooth movement of trade and of goods, so that there's no restriction on their movement. And I think there will be a discussion on this, and it's very positive. I think because if the funding comes, it may not take that long, because some infrastructure already exists.
Imagine to say it, when we talk about Middle East, I think funding isn't really the biggest problem when we're talking about the Middle East now.
Yeah, absolutely. So once they've committed, I think the funding will come and approvals will come quickly, and it may not be that long, before we see a complete connectivity between India, the Middle East, and the States, US.
Right. Professor Rajan Kumar, India has made G20 Summit a festival. If it were to happen somewhere outside, you hear about protests, you'd hear about a little bit of a photo op here and there, but not as big and the grandeur that G20 Summit in India comes with. That is something that hasn't been seen before. What is so different and unique about how Prime Minister Modi has reimagined, reshaped, renegotiated a global governance and global diplomacy, that today G20 is it looks like a festival? I mean, yesterday, from fountains to lightings to fireworks, there was pretty much everything. It felt like Diwali came in a month early.
And not only Diwali, it appears like, Diwali, Eid, and this Christmas all put together. So it's a grand event, and one of the things that India has contribution that India has made as far as G20 is concerned, it has taken the G20 from being just a diplomatic event to a real people's event. And now, whenever in future the other countries organize this kind of event, they will have to keep in mind, they'll have to match the grandeur of India, and that will be a challenge not only for other countries but also the future organizers. So it's a real festivity, it's a real celebration, as you rightly said. And as far as India's issues are concerned, the way India is contributing to this event, one is of course the substantial issue of trying to create a consensus in a kind of emerging bipolar kind of situation. So that's even the attempt to keep G20 afloat is a very big issue today. Because if we do not keep this afloat, the global issues, the transnational issues cannot be discussed in other forums. UN is too big, and you do not have any other forum like G20 where you can discuss truly global issues in a very limited setup. So from that perspective, it is important. The second, the way we say that this is not just about multilateralism, this is inclusive multilateralism. And by inclusive, what do you mean? Inclusive by including some of the countries which feel left out, the countries of the global south I'm referring to, but also saying that this is women-led, women-centric, human-centric, women-led kind of development approach. We are trying to change the narrative, where we are saying that it is not just a diplomatic event, but it's a real developmental event. And then we are talking about the substantial issue of this either it's Russia-Ukraine war or climate change or this SDG, etc. So these are important issues, and on number of areas, consensus is building up. There are indications that on certain areas even China has agreed. But there are sticking points, as Aditya rightly pointed out, that Russia-Ukraine would be a sticking point, and I think Russia is not going to agree, and China is not compromising. One of the things, had China been willing to negotiate, China would have sent its leader, the supreme leader Xi Jinping. But the fact that he has not come, so probably China is not willing to go to the extent of
which is quite ironical. I'll tell you why. Because Xi Jinping is one of those leaders who, right from the forefront, said that we're trying to foster a peace deal between Ukraine and Russia. But lo and behold, we're sitting at more than 600 days of that onslaught, and no end to it either. Some important points that you've raised. I'm going to take those to Professor Asif Ramiz Daudi with us on the broadcast. SDGs and Sustainable Development Goals and climate change, its mitigation, that has been a focus of G20, and not just G20, that has been a focus of Prime Minister Modi. I asked Aditya the same thing, and I'm going to put forth the same question to you as well, because the first theme is that of One Earth. The first session of the G20's inaugural summit in the national capital is that of One Earth, which is part of the Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam theme. One Earth सर, अकॉर्डिंग टू यू इसमें और कौन से challenges हैं जिसके बारे में बात होगी? Of course, the sustainable development goals is right there. We know that mitigating climate change and extreme weather events is top priority and focus as well. But what more? What apart from that? What will the people actually see in terms of change on ground zero?
I think,
Well,
are you
that's
asking me?
a very
No, I
good
was asking
question.
Professor Asif.
Well,
Do go
that's
on.
a very good question. We are aware of the SDGs, and these goals are to be achieved at the earliest, I believe. And that is one of the biggest concerns of India, and our Prime Minister very well said, and we all know about it. And that is also the concern of many of the world leaders. And the challenges that we are talking about, well, one thing is like whether these things are, I mean, when these things are discussed, these things are tabled, if we have the proper consensus, that is the issue, how they are going to implement that. Because we know in G20 or any groupings of this sort, I mean, when we talk about G20, it's huge, it's big. And this year's G20 summit is being taken to a different level by India. Like in the past, we had agenda points and things about SDGs, and we talked about climate change, but many things need to be revisited. And the implementation is another big challenge. And getting in the present scenario, when we have Russia-Ukraine war, when we have a crisis, the financial issues, debts, unemployment, and having these challenges, the different blocks, I mean, that is another complicated story. When we have the entire world, I mean, it's first time you can see in the entire world what kind of scenario is going on. I mean, the blocks are being created, and we are not sure what is exactly I mean, East and West. We have China on one side. We have Russia and European nation countries. So getting them into one platform, and at least when we talk about one Earth, yeah, this is theoretically, it's really it sounds really good, and we are trying to prove that Vasudeva Kutumbakam, when we talk about it, one Earth, one family, one future. Yes, even in different discussions, people were saying that it's not practically possible and it's not that practical. But I think that it's practical. Somebody has to take initiatives. Somebody has to, think about those challenges that might come, and it's a kind of initiative that you are trying to bring people together. If you succeed, at least if you go half of the way, and if you achieve 50% of your target, I mean, that is something which we can say it's a big achievement. So there are challenges. There are the biggest challenge, as I told you, to how to get these things in one platter, and how things get implemented. That
मोरक्को
I
में
think
आए
is
भूकंप से प्रभावित लोगों के प्रति मैं अपनी हार्दिक संवेदना प्रकट करना चाहता हूं। हम प्रार्थना करते हैं कि सभी इंजर्ड लोग शीघ्र स्वस्थ हो। इस कठिन समय में पूरा विश्व समुदाय मोरक्को के साथ है और हम उन्हें हर संभव सहायता पहुंचाने के लिए तैयार हैं। Your Highnesses, Excellencies, G20 के प्रेसिडेंट के तौर पर भारत आप सभी का हार्दिक स्वागत करता है। इस समय जिस स्थान पर हम एकत्रित हैं, यहां से कुछ ही किलोमीटर के फासले पर लगभग 2500 साल पुराना एक स्तंभ लगा हुआ है। इस स्तंभ पर प्राकृत भाषा में लिखा है, हेवम लोकसा हित मुखेति अथ इयम नातिसु हेवम, अर्थात मानवता का कल्याण और सुख सदैव सुनिश्चित किया जाए। 2500 साल पहले भारत की भूमि ने यह संदेश पूरे विश्व को दिया था। आइए इस संदेश को याद कर इस G20 समिट का हम आरंभ करें। 21वीं सदी का यह समय पूरी दुनिया को नई दिशा दिखाने वाला और नई दिशा देने वाला एक महत्वपूर्ण समय है। ये वो समय है जब वर्षों पुरानी चुनौतियां हमसे नए समाधान मांग रही हैं और इसलिए हमें ह्यूमन सेंट्रिक अप्रोच के साथ अपने हर दायित्व को निभाते हुए ही आगे बढ़ना है। फ्रेंड्स, कोविड-19 के बाद विश्व में एक बहुत बड़ा संकट विश्वास के अभाव का आया है। युद्ध ने इस ट्रस्ट डेफिसिट को और गहरा किया है। जब हम कोविड को हरा सकते हैं तो हम आपसी विश्वास पर आए इस संकट पर भी विजय प्राप्त कर सकते हैं। आज G20 के प्रेसिडेंट के तौर पर भारत पूरी दुनिया का आह्वान करता है कि हम मिलकर सबसे पहले इस ग्लोबल ट्रस्ट डेफिसिट को एक विश्वास, एक भरोसे में बदलें। यह हम सभी के साथ मिलकर चलने का समय है और इसलिए सबका साथ, सबका विकास, सबका विश्वास, सबका प्रयास का मंत्र हम सभी के लिए एक पथ प्रदर्शक बन सकता है। वैश्विक अर्थव्यवस्था में उथल-पुथल हो, नॉर्थ और साउथ का डिवाइड हो, ईस्ट और वेस्ट की दूरी हो, फूड, फ्यूल और फर्टिलाइजर का मैनेजमेंट हो, टेररिज्म और साइबर सिक्योरिटी हो, हेल्थ, एनर्जी और वाटर सिक्योरिटी हो, वर्तमान के साथ ही आने वाली पीढ़ियों के लिए हमें इन चुनौतियों के ठोस समाधान की तरफ बढ़ना ही होगा। फ्रेंड्स, भारत की G20 प्रेसिडेंसी देश के भीतर और देश के बाहर इंक्लूजन का, सबका साथ का प्रतीक बन गई है। भारत में ये पीपल्स G20 बन गया। करोड़ों भारतीय इससे जुड़े। देश के 60 से ज्यादा शहरों में 200 से ज्यादा अधिक बैठकें हुई। सबका साथ की भावना से ही भारत ने प्रस्ताव रखा था कि अफ्रीकन यूनियन को G20 की स्थायी सदस्यता दी जाए। मेरा विश्वास है कि इस प्रस्ताव पर हम सबकी सहमति है। आप सबकी सहमति से आगे की कार्रवाई शुरू करने से पहले मैं के अध्यक्ष को G20 के स्थायी सदस्य के रूप में अपना स्थान ग्रहण करने के लिए आमंत्रित करता हूं। Excellency,
Well, so ladies and gentlemen, what we just heard was the inaugural address by the Prime Minister of India and the current president of the G20, which is India, Bharat. Prime Minister Modi over there began the session with another historic achievement. African Union finally a proper full-blown member of the G20. It all began with the representative finally getting a place at the top table. Now, of course, with us continues to be former ambassadors and top diplomats and foreign policy experts. Ambassador Manju Seth, former Indian diplomat, with us on the show. We also have Professor Rajan Kumar, international policy expert. You know what? I'm going to quickly go across to Professor Rajan Kumar. You probably heard, Professor, the opening tidbits from the Prime Minister over there. And it sort of like laid bare the semantics of what the G20 is going to be like, all the topics and all the issues, all the areas of concern that are going to be addressed. But just the fact that he began with letting African Union first come onto the table and that gavel knocking onto the table 3 times, that particular visual and the loud applause after that, and finally the representative walking and finally sitting on the high table, that particular visual, that sentiment, that emotion, it's going to far outlive everybody, even Prime Minister Modi himself.
Absolutely, this is totally historic, and one of the things that will the generations to come will remember that this was in Delhi that African Union was became the member of G20. So it's a milestone, irrespective of whether we come to consensus on Delhi Declaration or not. But the fact that African Union has been included now, so now the name has changed. It's not G20, it's G21 now. So this is because of Delhi, and Delhi has contributed immensely, and the whole of Africa, I can tell you, that will appreciate this effort of India. And this is that moment that we are taking the concerns of Global South forward. So it's not just symbolic inclusion of this African Union, but also the bringing the issues of Global South, especially Africa, to the forefront. And from that perspective, it's very important. And coming to the points that Prime Minister discussed in the inaugural meeting, he referred to first India's history, historic messages, etc. And then he directly came to the global trust deficit. And he indirectly he was referring to the kind of crisis that you see in Eurasia, in Russia, etc. And then he also talked about some of the achievement that if we can overcome COVID, we can also overcome other crises that we are facing today. And after that, he welcomed the African Union.
And you know what, Professor Rajan, it's not just about the African Union. I also really appreciate the fact that the G20 summit began with, paying condolences and, appreciating the rescue and relief effort that is currently going on in Morocco, because the earthquake has completely ravaged the situation in Morocco. And the Prime Minister goes on to say कि जो भी सहायता चाहिए हो वो हम देने के लिए तैयार हैं.
Absolutely, India has been doing remarkable work as far as the disaster management is concerned. After the tsunami that we have developed a very efficient disaster management infrastructure, and we have also been focusing in all the multilateral organizations on agreements on disaster management. So India is at the forefront, and as you rightly said, that the Prime Minister sent a message to Morocco, and so we have been doing pretty well, and we are leading from the front as far as disaster management is concerned. In Turkey, Greece, number of countries we have sent our also in Pakistan, Bangladesh, etc. So we have been sending our knowledge, our funds also to the countries which are struck by disaster, and we're working on coming to some kind of agreement on disaster management mechanisms.
A first of so many kinds, Professor Rajan, isn't it? I mean, under India's presidency, it's going to become G21. It's the first time Africa Union's got on a full-blown membership. Delhi could be that place where Black Sea Grain Initiative can be revived. Delhi could be that place where, so many, after so long, the WTO, poultry dispute that has been resolved with the United States. I mean, so many firsts happening under India's presidency.
Somehow, I have not been seeing this the issue of what you call Green Deal being put at the forefront. I might be wrong because I'm not in touch with the kind of the negotiations which are happening inside. The main role of the Green Deal, because the Turkish leader and you showed Erdogan walking on the red.
Right.
Turkey becomes very important, and the deal can be done between Russia and Ukraine, and with the help of Turkey and United Nations. But somehow I see there'll be a kind of statement in the joint declaration where they'll talk about the issue of the Green Deal, and that could have been an important achievement, not only for Russia, Ukraine, but also for the countries of the global south. But somehow when I see the kind of issues which are being focused, so Green Deal is not at the forefront. I'm not saying this is not important or this will not be discussed, but it's not. So I'm not sure whether they can come with some agreement on the Green Deal, but they'll definitely try to push this initiative forward. But there are other issues where some kind of consensus is emerging.
Right, you're absolutely right. Professor Rajan, many thanks for joining with us and helping us out with your insightful inputs. I'll just quickly go across to Professor Asif Ramiz Daudi, Foreign Affairs expert. Sir, your quick thoughts on how the Prime Minister opened the inaugural session, G20 Summit. It's a big festival for India, and how the Prime Minister, postured, what all is going to happen at the G20 Summit, from Morocco to Africa Union to, well, whatever is slated to happen over the next couple of hours.
Well, that is marvelous. That is something we always expect from our Prime Minister, the way it was presented and the content. In your last question, when you were talking about the challenges, one thing was there in the Prime Minister's inaugural address as well, that is Vishwas. The abhau of the absence of the trust that we have, and that is one of the challenges I was telling you right before this speech was delivered. So it was something great, and let me say it very, kind of being a proud Indian, that in Delhi Declaration, from now onwards, will be saying this G21, and being the kind of emerging leader of global south, and having these developing nations and Africa, etc., on board. That was expected, and that is in fact the biggest achievement of India, and that is something. Just a moment.
Yeah, you know what, Professor Asif Ramiz, I'm going to have to cut you short again, because as luck would have it, I'll have to play out that reaction of the Prime Minister's opening remarks ahead of the G20 Summit. Once again, it was we were speaking to you when the Prime Minister began speaking, and we had to cut to him immediately. Let's quickly listen in to what the Prime Minister had to say, his opening remarks at the G20 Summit 2023 in New Delhi.
औपचारिक कार्रवाई शुरू करने से पहले हम सभी की ओर से कुछ देर पहले मोरक्को में आए भूकंप से प्रभावित लोगों के प्रति मैं अपनी हार्दिक संवेदना प्रकट करना चाहता हूं। हम प्रार्थना करते हैं कि सभी इंजर्ड लोग शीघ्र स्वस्थ हो। इस कठिन समय में पूरा विश्व समुदाय मोरक्को के साथ है, और हम उन्हें हर संभव सहायता पहुंचाने के लिए तैयार हैं। Your Highnesses, Excellencies, G20 के प्रेसिडेंट के तौर पर भारत आप सभी का हार्दिक स्वागत करता है। इस समय जिस स्थान पर हम एकत्रित हैं, यहां से कुछ ही किलोमीटर के फासले पर लगभग 2500 साल पुराना एक स्तंभ लगा हुआ है। इस स्तंभ पर प्राकृत भाषा में लिखा है, हेवम लोकसा हित मुखेति अथ इयम नातिसु हेवम, अर्थात मानवता का कल्याण और सुख सदैव सुनिश्चित किया जाए। 2500 साल पहले भारत की भूमि ने यह संदेश पूरे विश्व को दिया था। आइए इस संदेश को याद कर इस G20 समिट का हम आरंभ करें। 21वीं सदी का यह समय पूरी दुनिया को नई दिशा दिखाने वाला और नई दिशा देने वाला एक महत्वपूर्ण समय है। ये वो समय है जब वर्षों पुरानी चुनौतियां हमसे नए समाधान मांग रही हैं और इसलिए हमें ह्यूमन सेंट्रिक अप्रोच के साथ अपने हर दायित्व को निभाते हुए ही आगे बढ़ना है। फ्रेंड्स, कोविड-19 के बाद विश्व में एक बहुत बड़ा संकट विश्वास के अभाव का आया है। युद्ध ने इस ट्रस्ट डेफिसिट को और गहरा किया है। जब हम कोविड को हरा सकते हैं तो हम आपसी विश्वास पर आए इस संकट पर भी विजय प्राप्त कर सकते हैं। आज G20 के प्रेसिडेंट के तौर पर भारत पूरी दुनिया का आह्वान करता है कि हम मिलकर सबसे पहले इस ग्लोबल ट्रस्ट डेफिसिट को एक विश्वास, एक भरोसे में बदलें। यह हम सभी के साथ मिलकर चलने का समय है और इसलिए सबका साथ, सबका विकास, सबका विश्वास, सबका प्रयास का मंत्र हम सभी के लिए एक पथ प्रदर्शक बन सकता है। वैश्विक अर्थव्यवस्था में उथल-पुथल हो, नॉर्थ और साउथ का डिवाइड हो, ईस्ट और वेस्ट की दूरी हो, फूड, फ्यूल और फर्टिलाइजर का मैनेजमेंट हो, टेररिज्म और साइबर सिक्योरिटी हो, हेल्थ, एनर्जी और वाटर सिक्योरिटी हो, वर्तमान के साथ वाली पीढ़ियों के लिए हमें इन चुनौतियों के ठोस समाधान की तरफ बढ़ना ही होगा। फ्रेंड्स, भारत की G20 प्रेसिडेंसी देश के भीतर और देश के बाहर इंक्लूजन का, सबका साथ का प्रतीक बन गई है। भारत में ये पीपल्स G20 बन गया। करोड़ों भारतीय इससे जुड़े। देश के 60 से ज्यादा शहरों में 200 से ज्यादा अधिक बैठकें हुई। सबका साथ की भावना से ही भारत ने प्रस्ताव रखा था कि अफ्रीकन यूनियन को G20 की स्थायी सदस्यता दी जाए। मेरा विश्वास है कि इस प्रस्ताव पर हम सबकी सहमति है। आप सबकी सहमति से आगे की कार्रवाई शुरू करने से पहले मैं अफ्रीकन यूनियन के अध्यक्ष को G20 के स्थायी सदस्य के रूप में अपना स्थान ग्रहण करने के लिए आमंत्रित करता हूं। एक्सेलेंसी, इसके साथ ही मैं मीडिया के साथियों से भी विनम्र आग्रह करूंगा कि वे अब हमें समय दें और इस सभागृह से बाहर जाने का कष्ट करें।
Well, that was in fact the Prime Minister first of all expressing sympathy for the people of Morocco. He prayed for the souls that have died because of that earthquake. Meanwhile, he went ahead and also had a historic moment where he welcomed the African Union as a permanent member of the G20. He also went on to say that India's G20 presidency has become a symbol of Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas inside and outside of the country. He also went on to add that the idea of development is something that we have to have given a different direction during this time. He also went on to say that some of the age-old problems are now also seeking the same answers, and that it needs to be the responsibilities of the nations here to look into it. He also said that in a post-COVID world suffering from trust deficit, and the world has in fact deepened further, and this needs to be overcome. The Prime Minister also goes ahead and says that it's not only about the global trust deficit that needs to be turned into a trust of reliance. He also went to say that everyone should go with Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas, Sabka Vishwas, Sabka Prayas, and become the torchbearer for it, be it divided, and also the divide between the north and the south, the distance between east and the west, and management of food and fuel terrorism, cyber security, health, energy and water security should also be considered in such meetings. So the Prime Minister saying that it is the good time for everyone to work for global good. We will be giving you the coverage from the G20 as the meeting goes ahead. The summit has begun. The Prime Minister has given the welcome address, and the G20 delegates are also seated. African Union has been welcomed into the G20 meet. We will be giving you the updates from the summit as such. But on the other side, we track one of the biggest political stories happening down south in Andhra Pradesh, the arrest of Chandrababu Naidu.
China won't let us rest easy on our borders, but they will keep flooding our markets. What does Xi Jinping really want?
I think he wants the Indian market, no doubt about it. It's really a matter of showing their dominance.
India's great Chinese conundrum.
Nobody can contain it. Not the United States, not China, not anybody else.
Frenemies. Streaming now.
Hello and welcome to this News 9 special. Former Andhra Pradesh Chief Minister and Telugu Desam Party Chief N. Chandrababu Naidu was arrested by the CID in connection with corruption case involving the skill development issue. Now, the TDP MLA and former Minister Ganta Srinivas Rao and his son Ganta Raviteja were also arrested in the case. Chandrababu Naidu was in fact named first accused in that particular case. Especially, it is being said that it involves 371 crores. This particular aspect is said to have been because of an FIR that was filed in 2021 asking for investigation into around a 3,300 crore project that was set up to give skills to the youth in the state. However, the situation did not go down well, and we have come to understand that as the police went to arrest Chandrababu Naidu at 6 in the morning, it is being said that they were stopped by the TDP cadres who were around him. Chandrababu Naidu was taken into custody